Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 edition of the Photography Show. I'm Lydia Malama Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of AIPAD, and it has been a pleasure and an honor to partner with the MUUS collection for the last 3 years. Thank you to Michael, who's sitting front row, and to Richard, who brought this project to us 3 years ago, for their unending support for AIPAD, and we're thrilled this year to be presenting the Larry Fink exhibition. I hope you've all had a moment to check it out, and if not, that you'll need to attend after listening to this panel. And before I turn it over to Peter, I also just want to thank the incredible MUUS team, Lucrezia, Amanda, and many untold people, Christina, who I know I'm forgetting names, but who have been really wonderful to work with as we've continued this collaboration, especially around education and programming that matters to the history and the future of photography. So with that in mind, I'll let Peter introduce your panelists for this evening, or afternoon. Sorry, it's always hard to tell when you're in one of these centers. But thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, AIPAD. Thank you all for being here. It's exciting to be here looking at you all. My name is Peter Barberie. I'm the Brodsky Curator of Photographs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And here at AIPAD this year, I am curator of this year's presentation by the MUUS collection, Larry Fink, Creature Comforts. The MUUS collection acquired Larry's archive in 2024. And I want to thank Michael Sonnenfeld and Richard Grossbard, as well as the entire MUUS team, particularly Amanda Smith and Lucrezia Di Martino. It's been a great experience working with you all, and I appreciate the invitation to be here. I am very excited today to be joined by these two remarkable women. To my left, immediate left, I'm pleased to introduce Kathy Ryan, who was director of photography at the New York Times Magazine from 1987 to 2024. A storied career in which she brought important photography week in and week out to the public in the New York Times Magazine. An incredible run that benefited all of us. Among the artists that she worked with at the Times, Sebastião Salgado, Nan Goldin, Lindsay Addario, Nadar Khander, LaToya Ruby Frazier. I just selected some names that jumped out at me. Of course, Larry Fink is also one of the artists that she brought to the New York Times. In 2011, Aperture published Kathy's book, New York Times Magazine Photographs, which is a great compendium of some highlights from those years. And then in 2014, Aperture published Office Romance, which was, I believe, Kathy's first book of her own photographs, which started with an Instagram account and was her sort of romance with the office light and office people at the Times. I could list many accolades that Kathy Ryan has received. She's the winner of 2 Emmys in 2010 and 2011. And my personal favorite, in 2012, she was given the Outstanding Service to Photography Award from the Royal Photographic Society in London. So, Kathy, welcome. And Lisa Kereszi, to Kathy's left, is an amazing photographer and educator who succinctly describes her own work as being, quote, about family and also about escapism. Lisa has published numerous books of her photographs, including Fun and Games in 2009, and perhaps most famously, Joe's Junkyard in 2012, which is about her family's multi-generational junk business. Most recently, Lisa published 2 experimental books. The first is titled In, and it's a photographic record of the pandemic by herself, her husband Ben Donaldson, and their child. And the same year, she published Mourning, which is a surveillance project of a family gravesite. I highly recommend both of those books. Lisa holds a BA from Bard College, where she studied with Larry Fink, and an MFA from Yale. She is currently a senior critic at the Yale School of Art and assistant director of the photography program there. And she is represented in New York by the Yancey Richardson Gallery. So thank you, Lisa, for being here with us. We have been having an extended conversation about Larry, but we're going to sort of go one at a time, in part because we really do have very different avenues into Larry's world that we were all luckily a part of. I'm a curator, Kathy knew him as an editor, and Lisa as a student and a fellow artist. And I'm gonna kick things off just looking at some great photographs by Larry. This is The Haircut, Hellertown from 2015. And I think this is one of Larry's great pictures. The thing I love most about Larry's photography is how the physical and the emotional are completely intertwined. You don't get one without the other. Others often talk about his sort of brilliant way of insinuating himself into situations. Of course, his use of flash, which is technically really important. His attention to chiaroscuro and light and shadow. And all of those things are undoubtedly very important. But for me, what always pulls me into Larry's pictures is that I'm encountering what people want, what they hope for, what they need, again and again. And this is one picture that does that for me. From the other end of his career, in the mid-'70s, this is Studio 54 from 1977. This was part of Larry's breakthrough work called Social Graces, which was shown at the Museum of Modern Art in 1979, and then became an Aperture book several years later, where he really explored a couple of different worlds, the New York and Washington world of black tie galas and discos and elegant parties, and his own neighbors and their social gatherings in rural Pennsylvania. Here are two pictures from other series. On the left is George Plimpton and Models at Elaine's from 1999. I believe made either for the Times or for Vanity Fair. And on the right, the Blue Horizon, Philadelphia from 1992. Larry took editorial work to photograph boxing in the late 80s, and he had a great lifelong love of the sport, and he ended up spending 10 years making boxing pictures, and this is one of them. Larry was a red diaper baby, self-described, and an artist of the left, always. And he clearly knew his Karl Marx better than most people do. Perhaps because of that, he didn't stop at the dichotomies that many of his critics stop at when talking about his work. Dichotomies between rich and poor, between urban and rural. Larry's real subjects, I think, were the drives that we all share. Ambition, bravado, lust, rage, joy, vulnerability. And that's what we were aiming for in this year's presentation in the MUUS booth, which I hope you'll all see. I surprise a lot of my colleagues because among my favorite photographs by Larry are his praying mantis pictures. He made these over several years in the late 70s, so around the same time as Social Graces. And I think he probably had a little chemical help to become completely fascinated by the praying mantises on his farm. And he even at one point started ordering more mantises and growing them and breeding them. I don't think it went that well. And my favorite praying mantis pictures are the ones where he's clearly out on the farm, finding them, either devouring other creatures or making love, as you see on the right. I guess all of the qualities I described in his photographs of people, I see them in his photographs of animals as well. And hence the title of this year's exhibition, Creature Comforts. Larry, I don't think, saw too much of a distinction between us and the rest of the living world. And that's another, I think, really valuable aspect of what his work brings. Last year, I curated a survey of Larry's work and a survey of his wife's work, Martha Posner, a wonderful sculptor and painter who's here in the audience with us in Sarasota, Florida. And I'm ending my presentation with these two pictures because I selected them both for the Sarasota exhibition. I loved them both. I didn't even think about the context he made them for. On the left is the novelist Donald Antrim, And on the right is a woman named Joanne Rocket Miller, who was a juror in Louisiana. And it was only when I started talking with Kathy that I realized that Larry made both of these pictures because Kathy commissioned him to do so, that these were made for the New York Times. And I'll just end by saying one of the key things to understand about Larry is that his personal work, his editorial work, and his teaching were equally important for him. They were all vitally, vitally important. That's rare with any artist, that all those aspects of their working life come together in that way. That's why I'm so excited to have Lisa and Kathy talking today, because they knew him from those other parts of his world. And I was very excited to realize that these two great photographs, in part, we owe thanks to Kathy Ryan for those, as well as Larry. So with that, Kathy, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll give you the machine.
Thank you so much. I have to say, you don't know anything to me for commissioning Larry to do the beautiful portrait of Donald Antrim. I'm going to tell you the quick story behind that. When we were doing Donald Antrim, he had published a book about his struggle with his depression. So thinking of Larry, clearly an emotional, very real, vivid portrait. And I asked Clinton Cargill, one of the photo editors, to call Larry to set it up and take it from there. And at some point I said, ask Larry if he could do Donald Antrim in the space he writes. I'm just always curious to see a writer's space. Clinton asked him, hung up the phone, looked very stricken, and said, Larry said to tell Kathy, nobody tells me what to do. This was after we had worked together for 2 decades. So I just kind of laughed. And then I realized, of course, it's not about the environment for him. I know that. And he didn't care about the environment. And I noticed as I researched for this talk that I came across, I came across some fun emails, but this one in particular referred to the Donald Antrim, where he wrote at one point later, I know what I want to do, which is to hone in on his face and give the contextual drama by moving far into his physical soul. And then referring to the picture I had suggested, he said, if I don't see this portrait as something to do with context, but with immersion. And he also said something to me to the extent of, if I've seen pictures like that, banal pictures like that in your magazine in the past, if I recall correctly. So then, of course, he goes on to make, if I had to tell you my favorite picture he's done for us, I think it is the Donald Antrim portrait. To the hands of his wife on his shoulders. It's just a magnificent picture. And that's why you commissioned Larry. And I know that, not to show the space that he was in. He knew all along it would be the face. And the same is true of the next one. And what I want to do with the next portrait, I'm going to tell you the whole story that goes with that particular portrait of her. And that was, okay, we had an important story coming up at the magazine on non-unanimous juries. There were still 2 states left in the US, Louisiana and Oregon at the time, this is about 5-6 years ago, that could convict someone accused of a very serious crime with 2 holdout jurors, which meant that a lot of people were going to prison for long terms, even if 2 jurors felt strongly that they weren't guilty. Emily Bazelon was the writer. I wrote a long, beautiful email to Larry explaining the context of the piece. You don't have to read it, but a Timesian editor email laying out the parameters, what we needed to get, why it was important, and explaining the history of it. And there was a case going before the Supreme Court. And then, at that point, I turn it over to Amy Kellner, who I'd be working with, the photo editor, and Larry wrote the best emails of any photographer. And this is what he wrote back: Amy, to do justice is to cut the mustard. 11 was to leaven bread, the dough of our head. Silence came upon me. As I waited for ye, I need to eat a sandwich. Can we try again at 3? Larry. I responded, I assume this means you want to schedule a phone call for 3 o'clock? Larry wrote back in verse, Kathy, assumption takes gumption, gobble does hobble, a running heart is a strumming start. Is there a better time for you gals to speak? I can avail myself to your intensely peopled schedule. I am alone, the clock is my home. Hugs, Uncle Larry. Amy Kellner responded in poetry. Yes, 3 o'clock works for us. Apologies for missing the 11 a.m. bus. Tell me your phone number, would you please? I will call you on time, I guarantees. I have answers to all your questions. I will tell you them after lunch digestion. Then Larry wrote back, Amy, now we are talking our tongue. Our tongue aligned does the walking. To be free is to call at 3. Da-da-da-da-da-da, he's waiting by the phone. And then he does the shoot, and I'm going to tell you the story because Emily Bazelon, the writer, went with him. Usually that kind of an assignment, you wouldn't be accompanied by the writer, but in this case it was sensitive. She was going with Larry to do portraits both of the exonerated, the people who had spent time in prison for years only to be exonerated, and they had originally been convicted with a non-unanimous jury, and then they were seeking the juror holdouts. And ultimately, they also got one juror who had voted to convict and brought the two together. Anyway, so it was interesting. I called her to interview her like a week or two ago about what the experience was like. And we're going to talk more about that. But I love when he turned in the pictures. Again, I learned more from his learning, instruction, phone calls over the years. It was as if I was taking a class with him. Always there were these moments of just enlightenment. And I liked here when he turned in the pictures, he said at one point that they're very strong and very present, certifying yet again my lifelong order from Lisette Modell, of course, that a picture is a translation of an experience. It has little vitality for its own sake. And then here, he sends to Amy and me his attached sequence, his preferred sequence. And I think this just gives you insight into the editor-photographer process. He said that the sequence is my attempt at dedicating quality and depictive logic. So what he's saying there is quality being pictures that meet his needs as an artist, depictive logic meeting our needs as journalists at the New York Times. I know that's what he's intended by that. Into the hand, work at hand, along with the necessities of the story, the narrative part we had to get. I chose the pictures with some thoughts to photographic exploration. And that's always what we want the photographer to do, is some kind of photograph. That's what results in the best pictures, you know. And then he, after we received the pictures, we then got a bunch of emails. This one's at 1:38 p.m. Kathy, Amy, we wait with heated anticipation. Then a very short time later, a couple minutes later, he says he went through this, hold on, did I forget this one? Yeah. So he goes through the selects, and then a couple more, he goes through the selects, we talk about them, which are the strongest, which are the ones that we want to go back over. And then the next morning, he sends this, which of course he's very excited. And I loved that he says, wow, but for now, don't blow up the world, because note the date. January 6, 2020, 9:48 a.m. We all know what was going on then. And then he says, between the three of us, the selects and sequence is exacting and impacted. If she floats, I will be buoyant. And I loved that, but he also, there's another indicator of Larry's personality. He then put at the bottom of the email, it must be said that without Emily Bazelon, the writer, and Jamie and Jono's assistant, I am but an ancient legend floating ineffectively along. Can we mention them in any way? Like, he was so generous of spirit, he always wanted to mention anyone who was working with him. And then he's glad again. Of course, one of the reasons for assigning him to this story was he had a lifelong passion for justice. He was just born and with a drive to do justice, see better in the world, and this was an important assignment where he would be given a chance to take part in that through journalism. So then, when I spoke with Emily, she was saying, okay, this is one of the exonerated, and Michael Shannon. The story was titled Shadow of a Doubt, and she said when she first headed out with Larry, there were going to be 3 days driving around Louisiana trying to find the exonerees as well as the jurors, and the hard part would be people, regular folks caught up in something like that, even if they say they want to talk to the reporter, be photographed, it's sensitive, and it's not like you always arrive and they're ready. But she said that, and she was worried she hadn't worked closely with a photographer, that maybe that would be stressful. And she said it was the opposite, that he was so gracious of spirit that he put everyone at ease. At one point, they found Michael Shannon, I think, in the garage. He was a mechanic, and Larry just totally put him at ease, and people trusted him. Her words were, he had incredible grace with these people who'd used to being enmeshed in the criminal justice system. And then here, this is the holdout juror, Miwa Morrison, who, she was a dissenting juror, and he had served, I think it was approximately 10 years, Michael Shannon, in prison. I won't tell the whole story on all the portraits, but just this first one. And she had doubted the soul. There was one eyewitness. I mean, you know, all these stories have their particulars. And she was a school teacher, and the eyewitness had completely gotten the description wrong that she'd given. She'd said that the shooter that she'd seen from a car window 20 feet away without her glasses on was tall, 6 feet tall and stocky, like a football player. And the teacher looks at the defendant, and he's slim and short and didn't fit the description. And basically, she doubted it all along, but she was overruled by the other jurors. So again, I can't go into too much detail here, but the trial ended after only 5 hours, and after a half-hour of deliberation, the foreman went around the table and 10 jurors found Shannon guilty, and the judge praised the prosecutors for, quote, one of the quickest homicide cases I've had. So they're brought together, these two, for the first time. They were able to photograph them in the courthouse, and they had a very intimate conversation. Then again, beautiful Larry portrait, like just somehow, you know, he always talked about wanting to get to the intricacies of what makes someone. He had that ability, and it's the hardest thing. It's like an ineffable ability. It's not what a person looks like, or it's just some sense that he could somehow give you something about a person. And this gentleman was also many years in prison, and originally convicted at 17, and other witnesses had named a different suspect, so a whole bunch of things went wrong within the justice system. But then the Innocence Project got on board and presented 18 witnesses with direct evidence that he wasn't the shooter, but he'd spent years in prison. And there, again, one juror on that trial later regretted her decision of guilty. And then this is Reginald Adams, and in 1980, also super fast, he had falsely confessed to killing the wife of a police officer after the cops had given him Valium and alcohol during the interrogation, and the conviction was 10-2. But in 2006, that same police officer whose wife was killed was found guilty of murdering his second wife. And then at that point, it became obvious that this gentleman had not committed the crime, Reginald Adams, even though they had exacted a false confession from him, and they found out that, you know, all sorts of stuff went wrong down the line regarding the murder weapon, and they should have known. And he was exonerated after 34 years in prison. So you can imagine Larry with him, and you just see, and I think the face, the intensity of the life that he's led. Then here, this was an intense moment where they are together, and again, it's Larry and Emily with the two of them, and this person now with him had voted to convict Adams, and it was the first time they'd come together, and he said, in light of everything taken in consideration, I'm not mad at you. So they were an intense thing, but Larry had a big heart, so I think he could, but all the time making pictures. Then, of course, here, I agree with you. Interesting that you chose Joanne Rocket Miller, because I also thought it was powerful. Just the lines on her face, the life she's lived. And then one other thing from a photo, and she was a dissenting juror, of course, from a photo point of view was, you know, Larry was incredibly fast, and we're gonna get back to that in a second too. So Emily said they would spend hours driving, again, trying to connect with the different people, and it was incredible. When Larry would then meet them, he would make these decisions and make these portraits, sometimes in minutes. And that's something I'd never understood. And then there's one other thing before, and this is another exoneree, but I wanted to read a quote that came up when I was, you know, first of all, I gotta say, I'm so grateful and thank you for having me, that having this excuse to commune with Larry's spirit for the past 2 or 3 weeks prepping for this has been a joy. Has really just somehow, I could hear his voice all the time, you know, and it's like that thing, like he was such a great instructor.
I think we all feel that way.
Yeah, it was just to be thinking and reading about him. But I came across one quote that I loved where he was talking, and maybe it was in a video. You get different kinds of perceptual manifestations of what you think your meanings are right then, and then that's where I come in as a photographer. When that person wavers on the pathway to clarity, I photograph. And so for a photographer, as you're making a portrait, as the person somehow wavers, that moment to clarity, then he photographs. Then here, oh, hold on a second, I jumped ahead. Oh, now I really jumped ahead. I just gave you the hint to what's coming.
I think the bottom button.
Just right, so this is a BTS photo. Usually behind the scenes photos on a shoot don't have that much meaning. They're snapshots, right? It's just a record. This is in the courtroom where in the courthouse, they got permission, which is unusual. That's Emily Bazelon. She is recording them with an older recorder as the two are talking, the exoneree and the holdout juror. And come on, look at this picture, even a BTS. The light coming in from the window, it's got a kind of clerestory quality to it, like a cathedral, the cathedral of law, the law room. And then Emily's on the floor. That makes it a very different picture. Imagine if she was sitting at the same height, but of course Larry somehow sees the writer gets down on the floor. It seems to me he's telling us something. She's trying to stay out of the way of this intense, personal, intimate conversation. But I even love, you see the back of the pew, the bench, bisects the frame. That is a classic Larry compositional move. And the whole thing, the whole conversation today could be about his extraordinary facility with composition. And then one other thing I love is that light coming in illuminates all those scratches on the bench. That's a lot of history in that bench, in that courtroom. So I just love, he sees all that simultaneously. You know, he really is, we know he loved jazz musician, improvisational. So when we were doing this story, that was the period when I was doing the contributor photos. So Larry came, and they're all in the New York Times building, and that beautiful light, Renzo piano, the striping lights and shadows. So I had to do Larry's. It was, of course, a nerve-wracking day. The whole day, he was going to come at sunset hour. I wanted to catch him the western light and coming in through the windows. And photographing a major photographer, come on, what could be harder? Like, that's truly, it's just tough, right? He was great. The hat is his father's hat. He said his father had owned it for 50 years. First, I tried to get just a kind of, I was trying to get the dominant eye. You know, I love when you get the one eye, the dominant eye, and Larry had fierce eyes, warm heart, fierce eyes, you know, as a great photographer would. And I'm trying, I'm not getting anywhere. Then I even tried holding up a glass scene, just thinking maybe I can do something dramatic with the light and bend the shadows coming from the rods with the fierce eye. Then I just do the twinkly, impish Larry. So I'm like trying and trying and trying. And you know, Larry does the pictures, as I just said, in 3 or 4 minutes. And we're at least a half hour in at this point, if not 45 minutes. And I'm just feeling desperate, like I'm not getting the picture. And then Larry always had the little camera on his chest. He leans forward. He quickly in succession goes bing, 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 bing. Are they flattering? No. Are they true? Yes. Did he get the anxiety? Did he get the extreme stress that I was feeling? Yes. So I was like, it's not fair. In 3 frames, 4 frames, he makes these like very real pictures. Meanwhile, I'm struggling for a long time. And that's Stacy Baker, my comrade, and she reveres Larry, so she came also to kind of assist me, which basically means just moving the foam core boards around. But that was a great day. Anyway.
Thank you.
So actually, the first thing that I want to read is a quote from Larry that pertains to that last shoot that not directly, but as I was going through my emails, communing with Larry over the last couple weeks, this struck me. The subplot is the smell of the event and the image's power to address that by circling the eye and fixing it within the frame. That way, the experience of the photograph elicits its own memory. Hence, we create a double experience and a memory based on a duet, so to speak, a bass line and mighty improvisational treble. the memory of the aroma of mental transmission, the visual music within. So I just love thinking about that shoot you just shared with us as a duet. And actually, this isn't from an email. This is from a piece he wrote about the Junkyard book. Oops, sorry, back. Okay, this is one of my all-time favorite pictures by Larry, which I thought was hugely instructive. And so full disclosure is that I never actually took a semester-long class with Larry at Bard. I joined the photo major a little bit late, in the late 90s. I was actually a writing major. I thought I was going to be a poet, not a visual poet. And I joined the photography concentration late, and therefore I missed Larry's famous visual literacy class, which involved a lot of pictures projected and not on the wall, not tacked onto the wall. But he was my senior thesis advisor. And I wanted to share with you a few pictures that I made as part of my senior thesis, working very closely with him. So these next two photographs are by me. And I wanted to put them in succession after that fantastic Social Graces picture, because I think you can see the influence of my teacher. And I'm going to come back to them in a second, but I want to go forward to the next frame to sort of explain. So this is Larry's picture, famous picture from a bar. So Stephen Shore and Larry Fink at Bard were sort of like two ends of two poles of a magnet, right? And their teaching styles were really different. And I sat down with Stephen, and I presented a list of possible senior thesis projects, September of 1994. And one of the projects that I described was a project about addiction, about drug and alcohol addiction, and I was interested in photographing people partying, but also people being interviewed about their experiences, whether it was their own addiction or a loved one's. And knowing that that area was not really Stephen's forte, but that his partner in crime, Larry, that it was, Stephen assigned me to be with Larry, who I had never worked with prior. So I don't know what's going on here. I just want to kind of go back to these two pictures that I made as soon as I started working with him. And my work was heavily influenced by Stephen's prior to this. And Larry told me to check out the MUUS C330. He explained how to use the Vivitar 285 HV with the little bouncing card, and sent me off into the night of Bard. But something that's really important to me as an educator and photographer is that, I think that whether fate puts us together or we're drawn to an artist because of a connection with their work, I think something that happens a lot in education, in art education, is sort of an homage, an emulation of your teacher. And actually, there are even emulation assignments that we give now to the undergrads and graduate students at Yale. But what's important, though, is that you learn from your teacher. I learned from Stephen, I learned from Larry. Later in graduate school, I learned from Crutzen and Papa George, and then also I worked for Nan Golden in between. And I see my work change and develop over the years, and I sort of take a little bit from each of them, but it has to be blended with all of who I am. And then you kind of like in AA, you like take what you need and leave the rest. I don't know, some of you are familiar. It's important to kind of connect with another artist's work, emulate them, find the best parts of it, but then let go and let some of it go on the cutting room floor and figure out who you are and what your voice is as you're going through. So this is the last senior thesis picture I wanted to show of mine. And this is a moment I wrote about that some of you might have read about, but I have a very visceral memory of this meeting with Larry when I showed him this contact sheet of my grandmother being interviewed about my father, her son's addiction, and I didn't mark this on the contact sheet. And Larry, in his classic, and those of you who ever studied with him know that sometimes his criticism and his feedback came in the form of scat, so, or comic book exclamations. So, you know, I just remember his finger, you know, pressing on the contact sheet, and he's like, bam, pow, you know, zing, you know. And he asked me, why didn't you print this picture? Why didn't you even mark it? There's not even a question mark on it. And I said to him, Larry, it's too much. And he just looked at me like I was crazy. And he's like, but, you know, I'm sure he said, darling, you know, too much is enough, is just enough for a picture. And so it was just, that moment changed so much for me. And even if my work doesn't really look like this anymore, I came to understand from that moment that not to shy away from emotion, not to shy away from something really intense. Speaking of intense, here's Jean Sabatine. And you know, something else I wanted to talk about in relation to working with Larry at Bard is that I have a picture of my grandmother not unlike this, with a firearm. And there's actually a bullet hole in the wall of our the wallpaper. I have pictures very similar to this of my family, my extended family, my junkyard cousins and aunts and uncles. And, you know, being at a place like Bard, which at the time was, I think, the second most expensive tuition in the country, I was a full scholarship kid, and, you know, seeing social graces and seeing this person that was able to pass between, you know, these varied social milieus and do it seamlessly and tell people's stories that were both, you know, some level of criticality but love at the same time. And so I really was able to see myself and my people. I'm a Pennsylvania girl too. My grandfather grew up just a couple towns over from Martins Creek in Bethlehem, in the shadow of the steel mill in Bethlehem that everyone knows Evans photographed. My grandfather, before he started the junkyard, was a boxer. This could be my grandfather. And so, you know, there was something about just that empathy for people of all walks of life, and empathy that actually I could feel for myself through Larry, and the kindness and compassion I could feel for myself through this man. Speaking of his generosity, I have a print of this on my wall in my office. You know, he traded with us. He treated us, even at age 21, like I was a photographer. I was an artist. And so, you know, to have him trade, and then I got to go through and pick whatever I wanted, and it was important to me to pick a boxing photo because of my grandfather. His generosity of spirit was always just, you know, another way that I think he models the life of an artist to all of us was just kind of through his being. Yes, he could say, too much is enough. And yes, he could say, this one works, and here's how you use the lighting, and oh, stop using that Yashica mat, it's not sharp enough, get the MUUS C330. You know, there's all that practical stuff, but also leading by example. And here's just a few of the other social graces on the other end of the spectrum from Martins Creek. And then a few more pictures I just wanted to show were pictures he made while I was a student. And so another way that I think he really affected a lot of us was he was a working photographer. He was a working stiff. So, you know, he would come in and he would tell us about Hillary. He would tell us about working for the New York Times. This shoot of Ralph Reed and the Religious Right was a major one that he talked about. And I remember him showing us these pictures, and I remember him telling us how he was a chameleon, and he would just like put the tux on And he even said he put a button on that was like,
Ralph Reed?
yeah, Ralph Reed button, to make these pictures, to kind of go incognito. And also, while I was his student, he also did a campaign for Nike, photographing women athletes. And I just remember, I don't know, just thinking that, okay, I don't have to just have pictures on the wall in a gallery or museum, right? I also want to aspire to be a magazine photographer. I also want to aspire to tell people's stories and make beautiful portraits. And then the last picture I want to show is a picture I made 12 years ago at the farm. There's a couple quotes I did want to read. I didn't read any of my notes. He said at one point, the role of the teacher is to be a creative custodian. I love that. Also, another quote that I've always loved, I remember sitting in the kitchen on the farm and him looking into my eyes and telling me I was a peasant. I had the face of a peasant. And I was like, am I offended by that? No, I'm not, because there's something he sees in me that I think is true. And the last thing I want to say is a quote from 2015, November 3rd, which I think was Walker Evans' birthday, right? November 3rd? 2015, he says, I might be on my way out, but not soon. I'm negotiating with myself, putting fuel in the motor and looking to gain the higher RPMs. Then when I die, I will be a streak of light ascending towards the sun. Oh. Yeah, when I found that, I was bowled over. Well,
Thank you,
yeah,
Lisa.
that's all for now.
Great. The audience can't see this, but we have a countdown clock in front of us,
Yeah.
and Lisa ended exactly at 0. So I think we're doing a great job as a panel. That was amazing to hear from both of you, and when you were talking about the way he spoke to you as a student, the fact that he mentioned Lisette Modell to Kathy in that email, Lisette Modell being his great teacher, he and Deanne Arbus are maybe her two most famous students. They worked with her independently. So that kind of lineage and that sort of artistic conversation that goes on across generations, whether it's between people who knew each other or looking at books or whatever, is really important. And I think that ties into the way Larry thought about jazz as well, that there are these standards and you keep riffing on them all the time. Well, I have tons of questions, but I think we should open it up to our audience, or to either of you if you want to ask some questions of each other. But and there is a person with a microphone, Michelle, at the back, and so if somebody wants to ask a question, she'll come over and give you the mic. In the front.
I'm kind of curious about, thank you. I'm kind of curious, we mentioned Lisette Modell a couple of times in this talk, and I was just wondering if any of the three of you have some more stories and anecdotes between Lisette and Larry.
Larry, in my experiences, he mentioned Lisette a lot. It was always Lisette, and the first few times I was like, who? And then, then I had to figure it out. But he didn't tell anecdotes about working with her. It was really just more sort of like in the email to Kathy. It's clear that her way of navigating the world just stayed with him, at least that was my experience of him talking about her. And I actually don't think we don't have any Lisette Modell slides, but his work is utterly different than hers in a lot of ways. She didn't get into the tangles of parties and really get in. I don't ever feel like I know somebody in a Lisette Modell photograph, even though I love her work. it's much more distant. And with Larry, I think one of the things is I feel like I get these people. I understand something about this person in front of me that makes me empathize.
You know the book you wrote, the great intro on composition. What was the rest of the title? Can you
Please share with us.
No, I don't.
There's a great book. I want to make a plug for a book, and I can't remember the exact title. It's called On Composition and Something. Thank you. How could I forget that? Larry Fink, Improvisation. And it's got a beautiful intro by Lisa, and it's a fabulous book that I read twice in prep for this. It's quotes from Larry. Each picture has a text block with nuggets of wisdom. I bought 5 of them last week just to give to rising photographers. So I just want to mention On Composition and Improvisation. Yeah. You know, and speaking of improvisation and jazz, the last time we reached out to him for an assignment, we had something coming up. Actually, a person who works at the Times likes to play his sax in public. He would live near Riverside Park, and he would go play the sax, and he'd written one of those short essays for us. And of course, I thought of Larry, and it was in September, I think, and I wrote to the studio, and I got a reply back saying he can't come into the city for that, but that's exactly the kind of job he would normally like, which of course I knew, and then he passed away like 2 months later, and I have that email. Yeah, and I kind of looked, and I thought, oh, it doesn't sound good. I knew he was sick, and that, you know, he wouldn't turn down something involving somebody playing a sax outdoors. Like, that would be so up his alley. I'm sure a lot of you know some of his musician photos, and yeah.
He always had a harmonica.
And then I had a short video. He took out the harmonica when I was shooting him, but we couldn't get the video to work. It was just a very short clip that was great that day. He just played it all. He regularly just took it out. I don't know. It must have given him reassurance or something in the day. Yeah, it was great.
Hello. I have a very basic question, 2 parts of it. He early on made some technical decisions of how he was going to communicate his imagery. And one of them was the square format, and one of them was this black and white, hard-edged, hard light from a certain... So my question is, being a working photographer, what would happen early on in his career when somebody said, you know, we really need color. We use color in this magazine. Oh. And I'm talking about early on when people didn't know that. He established himself to be able to say, this is what I do, and if you want me to do it, this is what I do. There's a lot of pressure though early on, and I'm just curious about that decision. Like, did he ever do photography? Did he have a color problem visually? Or did the medium just work for him better to tell his psychological story in that harsh black and white? And I don't mean harsh, I just mean stark. Yep.
So I don't remember him ever doing color for us. I don't think he did. I don't want to say for the record, but I'm 95% certain he didn't. Every assignment was black and white. But the reason, when you go to Larry to commission him, as the photo editor, you've already made the decision. It will be black and white, and it will be square. So that's the thing. Like, he's in that category. So he's that person that the thing he does is so distinct, and it's just, that is his visual signature. So he wouldn't be someone, and I get what you're saying, early in his career, would he have been more influenceable knowing Larry Fink? Probably not. Like, I think he probably made that decision pretty early. And also, that's part of his greatness. Like, his compositions in that square, the years it took him to do that, I'm not sure that if you tried to push him outside that he's not the type, I think, you'd be like, oh, you want to push him into the next realm? I think it's more you want to hand him something that he can do exactly what he does, is my, as the person who when I'd assign him, it was either, I would say the 2 main things would be to either go after something that involved tremendous humanity, justice, the story on the non-unanimous juries, or the parties. Like, I did have a big shoot he did for us once at it was one of our special issues on wealth in America, maybe 20 years ago, and it was the daughter of a famous like music industry person, and there you'd have all the cacophony and the motion within the frame and all that terrific, extraordinary kind of compositional muscle that he had. And he was so good at harnessing chaos. So sometimes it'd be great to just, one of the regrets I had the past 2 or 3 weeks is, why didn't I sign him more to stories that had that element, where it just go out there, it's going to be chaotic and make sense.
Lisa, pardon me, do you remember, you seem to remember color work?
Yeah, but first I will say, and this is just me guessing, but thinking about the beats and thinking about Larry's early work, being in black and white, back in the day, we all started by learning black and white. Not so today, but back then, for sure, and maybe he just hit on his way of working, his mode of working, and, had a confidence that he wasn't going to try anything else. But there was one time, I don't remember if this was, I feel like he commissioned himself. I feel like, I could be wrong, and help me out if I'm misremembering this, but he hired, or someone hired, a George Bush Jr. impersonator.
That's right. Yes.
And staged a party, the Forbidden Pictures, and they were color.
Well, they were color because they were to be, the shoot was done in July 2001. And yes, right? And then it was supposed to be published in September 2001, right?
Something like that.
And these are photographs, most of you have not seen them because they weren't published then for obvious reasons. But he found these models who looked just like Bush in his cabinet. Oh, really? Anyway, the first time he showed them to me, I was like, holy, what happened? So, and yes, those were in color. Do you remember? And Martha and Molly. Okay.
Larry wanted to make a statement about how he felt about the George Bush administration, and whoever was working with him at the time had no idea what Larry was really talking about, because they let him set up all these political situations based upon the degenerative art. It was filmed at thank you. It was shot, as Molly said, with a number of her friends, also a number of dancers from the New York City Ballet at the National Arts Club. And it was a brilliant shoot, and there were costumes and pseudo-celebrities and lookalikes, and then it was totally shut down because of the inevitable, and no one would touch that work for years. And then one day, Lehigh University decided to show the work not in their gallery, but in one of the other buildings of the college. And the Young Republican Club shut down the college phone lines, calling and complaining. Larry was thrilled. He was literally in every publication around the world. People were sending us newspapers in various Asian languages, European languages, Hebrew, and Fox News came to our house. It wasn't Bill O'Reilly, but it was his show. 2 of his reporters came to the house. I was like mortified. I didn't want anybody there from Fox News. Larry was thrilled. Anyways, that's the color work. Years later, I guess Powerhouse had a gallery at that time, and they are the only ones who did show the work, and they produced a small book. Yeah.
But do you know why it was in color?
The paintings, because he
He wanted it to look like a George Grage painting
Yeah.
or something, right? Like these corrupt, fat
He
cats.
loved those paintings, like he was very, very influenced by the German expressionist painters. And so it just had to be in color for that reason. And
Okay.
they're amazing.
But, you know, I met Larry once at the farm, and we were talking about the black and white, and it was very interesting. I asked Larry, like, who was one of his big influences, and when we think of, like, you know, painting is one of, you know, was one of many of his influences, he said Caravaggio. And when you think about Larry's work and you look at the motion in the work, the darkness, you know, and all that, it really, Caravaggio was his, you know, idol. And he had told me that when I had met him back about a year and a half ago. And I'll never forget that. And when I looked at the pictures, I can never look at the pictures and not think of Caravaggio.
Yeah. That's what that flash was all about. You know, that gave him the ability to go to blackness and call him and emphasize that. Yeah, it was incredible.
Okay, well, I think we can take one more question, and I see a raised hand there.
Thank you so much. Kathy, I'm curious to know how you first met Larry, and if you have any stories of how you first met him.
I don't remember the first meeting. I'm sorry, it's that far back.
You know,
I'm old. I can't, it's like,
I just want to jump in and say, I only met Larry about 15 years ago, and I was amazed when I realized that I also cannot remember how I met
can't
him.
remember.
And, you know, he was a world-famous artist when I met him, but I think it says a lot about Larry that, like, all of a sudden he was just in my life, right? Larry was just a part of things. You'd get emails, you'd get phone calls. And that was it. He was just there, you know. Lulu was how he usually signed his emails.
He signed a lot of them, Lulu.
This doesn't answer that question for me, but there was a story that really, I don't know why I feel like I need to tell it, but I had visited the farm when I was a student or had just graduated, so like in the 90s, and then I didn't visit for a really long time. I hand wrote the directions, because this is before, you know, iPhones and all that, right? Late 90s, early 2000s, years later. So I wrote down the instructions. Somehow I lost them in the car or on my way. I don't know how, but I found my way to the farm. And if you've been there, you know you have
It's
to go
really
through the
hard to
soybean
find.
fields. And I'm like, right or left? And, you know, I just kind of felt it. And I just went down, you know. And it was just like I was being drawn to this oasis.
Okay, one more, Stephen. That's it.
So, you could probably hear me. I'll just tell you how I met Larry because it speaks to his generosity. It was probably the late 1970s. I went into the light gallery and there's Larry. Say hello. We talk. He says, you know, I'm hungry. I'd love to go to a Japanese restaurant for lunch. And I said, I know a place. And we went around the corner for lunch, having just met. And that was the start of a lifelong friendship.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming to the Oasis with us.
Thank you. Thank you for that.